The courtroom froze. Even Judge Clarence Thomas, known for his silence and sharp control, sat stunned. Why? Because Jasmine Crockett had just dropped a piece of evidence. That turned the entire case upside down. What happened next, no one saw coming. The room was electric, but no one dared speak. The courtroom, packed to the edges with onlookers, attorneys, clerks, and legal observers, felt less like a place of law and more like a stage where something historic was about to unfold. You could feel it in the air, a strange, thick silence that buzzed just beneath the surface. Every seat was filled, not just with professionals, but with people who had a sense that today would be different. They didn't know how, and they didn't know why, but they stayed, leaned forward, alert. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the room creaked open. The bailiff stepped forward, straightened his jacket, and announced in a booming voice that sliced through the stillness like a blade, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Clarence Thomas." Everyone stood. The shuffle of feet against the wooden floor echoed, then faded into complete silence. Every pair of eyes turned toward the front. Judge Clarence Thomas entered, calm, composed, steady. A man who had seen it all. Decades of decisions, courtrooms across the country. High-stakes cases that changed lives and laws. He was the kind of judge whose presence commanded immediate respect. And not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. Wearing his signature black robe and an unreadable expression, Thomas walked deliberately to the bench and sat down. He scanned the courtroom quickly, as he always did, a ritual more than a necessity. But today, something caught his eye. She was already there, standing at the front table, her shoulders square, her head held high, was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, known to many for her fierce voice in legislative chambers and viral moments of direct confrontatio. Today she was something different. She wasn't behind a microphone or on a panel. She was in a courtroom, on legal ground, and fully prepared. And she looked the part. Jasmine Crockett wore a charcoal grey suit, simple and sharp. No flash, no glitter, just focus. Her hands rested on a thin leather folder. Her eyes, unwavering, stayed locked on the bench, not out of challenge, but out of purpose. She wasn't here to perform. She was here to present. The entire room seemed to shift. It wasn't just about her title. It was a presence. She brought a quiet intensity, the kind you feel before a storm rolls in. Not loud, not chaotic, just powerful, controlled, unshakable. The lawyers at the opposing table, high-paid, well-dressed, and well-connected, glanced at one another. One leaned over to whisper something but stopped halfway. The air was too tense, too loaded. Even the judge, stoic as ever, showed a flicker of curiosity. He leaned back slightly in his chair, tapped his fingers on the desk, and said with measured tone, "Congresswoman Crockett, I assume you're representing today?" She nodded once. "That's correct, Your Honor." He raised a brow, not in disapproval, but intrigue. He'd seen thousands of attorneys, but few had the nerve to enter a courtroom like this. Fewer still were sitting members of Congress, and almost none had walked in with the quiet confidence that Crockett carried. Like armor. This wasn't about politics. This wasn't grandstanding. This was something deeper. Jasmine Crockett had come to fight, and she had come prepared. A few feet behind her sat a box filled with documents, evidence, and something no one else in the room expected: the truth buried deep inside official memos, financial forms, and carefully timed decisions. But she wasn't going to throw it all on the table at once. She was going to build it, piece by piece, word by word. The room settled into silence again. Judge Thomas signaled for the proceedings to begin. The attorneys adjusted their papers. The clerk prepared the case files. But all anyone could think about, from the front bench to the last row in the gallery, was one thing. What was Jasmine Crockett about to do? And more importantly, was the courtroom, or even Judge Clarence Thomas, ready for it? What unfolded next wasn't just a legal case, it was a collision of two worlds. On one side sat Judge Clarence Thomas, a figure rooted deep in the traditions of American law. His courtroom was known for its discipline, its structure, its respect for precedent. His rulings had shaped policy. His opinions had rippled through decades of legal doctrine. He didn't smile often, and he didn't tolerate missteps. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, fierce, determined, and completely undeterred by the prestige in front of her. Her name had become synonymous with bold truth-telling and fearless advocacy. But here, she had taken off the congressional badge and stepped back into her roots, the courtroom. The case itself looked simple on the surface. A whistleblower had brought forward claims of corruption tied to a $2 million government contract. It involved a major federal vendor, an internal transfer of funds, and a suspicious paper trail. Nothing explosive at first glance. In fact, some in the courtroom assumed the case would be procedural, buried in technicalities and dismissed in record time. But that assumption died the moment Jasmine Crockett opened her folder. Before she even said a word, her presence had disrupted the rhythm of the courtroom. This wasn't the polished, buttoned-up lawyer the defense team had expected. This was someone with fire behind her eyes and files in her hand that held more weight than anyone was ready for. Judge Thomas, careful and composed, asked a direct question, the kind that set the tone early. "Congresswoman Crockett, may I ask why I appear here in person? Most individuals in your position would delegate." Crockett answered without hesitation. No notes, no dramatic pause. Because this case isn't just about misused funds, it's about the integrity of process. When systems protect themselves instead of the people they serve, it takes someone from inside that system to hold it accountable. There was a pause. Not the kind of pause that signals discomfort, but the kind that happens when the entire room realizes something just shifted. This wasn't going to be business as usual. The corporate defense team, three well-groomed attorneys in crisp suits, exchanged glances. Their lead counsel, a silver-haired man with decades of courtroom experience, smoked slightly, brushing off Crockett's words as political theater. But the smoke faded quickly as she began to outline her opening statement. No fluff, no wasted words. She presented a timeline specific, tight, damning. It detailed contract approvals, internal memos, and executive meetings, all pointing toward deliberate manipulation of government oversight. She didn't accuse blindly. She pointed with precision. This isn't a case of negligence. This is a case of design. Documents were redrafted. Language was softened. Oversight was dodged. And in the center of it, someone decided that public funds could be funneled behind closed doors without consequence. The judge raised an eyebrow. He didn't interrupt. The defense, sensing momentum building against them, objected, quickly questioning the relevancy of Crockett's documents, asking for time to review, trying to trip her early. But Jasmine wasn't. Rattled. She anticipated every move with measured calm. She laid out the authority under which each document had been obtained. She showed email chains confirming dates, signatures from department heads, and even a statement from a former compliance officer whose words painted a troubling picture. And the moment that truly shifted the mood, when she revealed that one of the key memos had been altered twice, once by legal counsel, and once again by a senior executive who removed language that flagged federal ethical conflict. That was no accident. That was intent. When language is changed to hide truth, we're not in the realm of technical errors. We're looking at a coordinated attempt to deceive. She stated firmly. The defense team tried to keep their composure, but behind their polished expressions, it was clear they hadn't expected this. Judge Thomas leaned forward slightly. It was subtle, but it was there. The look of someone who had just seen a chessboard he thought he understood, completely rearranged. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a showdown between power and principle, prestige and purpose, legal armor and raw truth. And Jasmine Crockett had just declared that she wasn't here to play their game. She was here to change it. There's a moment in every courtroom drama where the energy shifts, not just in tone, but in weight. And in this case, that moment came when Jasmine Crockett reached down into her briefcase and pulled out a thick, worn folder. She didn't slam it on the table. She didn't wave it in the air. She simply laid it down gently, opened it with care. and began to remove the kind of evidence that doesn't just support an argument, it redefines it. The courtroom, already still, went utterly silent. She stood, slowly, holding up a printed chain of internal emails for the court to see. Her voice was measured, deliberate. This email was sent 3 days before the contract was approved. In it, we see clear discussion about how to soften language, to avoid raising red flags. That's not speculation, that's a direct quote. There was an audible stir in the courtroom, a shuffle of papers, a few hushed whispers, and the unmistakable sound of the opposing legal team scrambling to reassess their footing. But Jasmine wasn't done. From the folder, she drew out meeting notes, handwritten, initialed, and time-stamped. In the margins, a line was underlined twice, delay compliance review until second quarter. Potential exposure risk. That phrase, Crockett said, looking directly at the judge, was written by a senior legal advisor at the agency, overseeing the contract, and it shows awareness, not ignorance, of ethical risk. Still calm, still sharp, still in complete control. Then came the moment that turned the hearing upside down. Crockett handed a sealed manila envelope to the clerk and asked it be submitted into the record. Judge Thomas leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharpening. "What is this?" he asked, more curious than confrontational. Her answer was brief and deadly. A recorded conversation between two federal officials discussing how to alter legal documents. In order to bypass congressional review, gasps broke out, the kind of collective exhale when a room full of people realizes something far more serious is unfolding than they imagined. Crockett continued, "This isn't rumor. This isn't guesswork. It's on tape, and the voices are verified." The defense team exploded into motion, immediately objecting. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This is not verified. This is inadmissible unless properly reviewed and authenticated." But Crockett didn't even turn to them. Instead, she reached into her folder again and pulled out a signed affidavit from the whistleblower confirming the authenticity of the audio file. She followed it with phone records, internal reports, and a timeline that aligned the audio with email logs and document revisions. "The timing isn't coincidence," she said, stepping slightly closer to the bench. The conversation took place at 3:47 p.m. At 4:16 p.m., the contract language was revised. At 5:02, it was signed. What happened in between? A deliberate rewrite to remove language that would have triggered oversight. You could hear a pin drop. Judge Clarence Thomas said nothing. His face remained mostly unreadable, but his silence was telling. He tapped a finger slowly against the bench. That quiet gesture, from a man who rarely broke expression, revealed it all. He was impressed and concerned still. The defense wasn't ready to let it go. They leaned on technicalities, claiming the evidence wasn't presented early enough, that the context of the recording wasn't clear, that no laws were explicitly broken. But Crockett was already ahead of them. "You don't need to hear a confession to know intent," she said sharply. "The law doesn't demand perfection. It demands accountability." And then came the moment that shattered the last line of defense. She held up one final document, a financial authorization form. It showed the approval of a $2 million fund transfer, signed and executed less than 24 hours after the recorded conversation took place, signed by the same individuals in that recording. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a decision, and the paper trail proves it. The judge didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room, from the attorneys to the observers in the back row, felt the weight of what had just happened. Crockett had done more than present evidence. She had exposed a cover-up, methodically, without theatrics, and without a single wasted word. She didn't shout. She didn't showboat. She simply let the facts and their chilling clarity do the talking. And by the time she returned to her seat, the entire tone of the courtroom had changed. This wasn't just about documents anymore. It was about truth. And what happens when someone finally dares to lay it bare before power? Asterisk after Jasmine, Crockett laid out her evidence with ruthless clarity. The courtroom didn't just fall silent, it shifted. Something deeper had changed. The case was no longer about paperwork, dates, or missing clauses. It was about strategy, intellect, and pressure. And at the center of it all was a chess match playing out in real time between a seasoned federal judge, a defensive legal powerhouse, and a lone attorney turned congresswoman who refused to back down. The defense team, realizing they were on the ropes, adjusted quickly. Their lead counsel once calm and assured rose from his chair, his voice cool but slightly forced. "Your Honor, I'd like to remind the court that even compelling evidence requires authentication. The audio in question, though dramatic, is not proof of wrongdoing unless placed in proper context." It was a classic move. Try to plant doubt. In the room, shift focus from what was said to how it was obtained. Undermine the process, not the truth. Jasmine Crockett didn't even blink. She stood, slowly, walked to the lectern, and in a calm, unshaken voice replied, "Context is exactly what we've been missing until now." Her words landed with precision. She wasn't reacting emotionally, she was executing a plan, and everyone could feel it. She pulled out another piece of paper, just one. On it was a short transcript of the beginning of the now infamous recorded conversation. She read it aloud. "We need to be careful with the language in this next version. If oversight sees it, it's going to be a problem. That's not idle conversation. That's intent." She paused, letting the words sink in, then added, "And when intent meets action like rewriting policy to hide it, that's not context. That's conspiracy." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The defense attorney adjusted his tie. The courtroom heat had turned up a notch. He tried again. "Raising procedural concerns, the court must consider whether the congresswoman's presentation is theatrical rather than legal. Is this an evidentiary argument or a performance?" That's when Crockett struck. She walked back to her desk, lifted a single sheet, and calmly read the regulation governing the admissibility of whistleblower evidence. In federal hearings, every phrase she read supported her right to present the recording. It was meticulous, clean. By the book, no theatrics, she said plainly, just the law. It was a turning point. The judge, still quiet, was no longer just listening. He was studying her, not just the evidence, but the way she controlled the room. She anticipated every move. She spoke only when necessary. She let the defense throw punches, then sidestepped them like a seasoned fighter in the ring. Even when the defense tried to dismiss the evidence as circumstantial, she leaned in, tapped the financial authorization form already admitted into the record and said, "Circumstantial." The document was signed within hours of that conversation. That's not coincidence. That's cause and effect. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Controlled, deliberate, and direct. Her words didn't just dismantle arguments, they disarmed them. The judge spoke, finally. His voice low but firm. "You seem to have anticipated every objection so far, Congresswoman." Crockett responded with a faint smile. "I was trained to, and that was no exaggeration. Before politics, before cameras and microphones, Jasmine Crockett had been a trial lawyer, and now she was back in her element, stripping away distractions, cutting through legal smoke screens and exposing the raw mechanics of corruption with surgical accuracy. The defense made one final push, asking for a recess to review the material thoroughly, but it was too late. The courtroom had already seen enough. The jury, though not present, wasn't the real audience. It was the system itself, and right now the system was struggling to keep up with her. Judge Thomas adjusted his glasses, leaned back in his chair, and looked down at the evidence before him. He tapped his pen softly against the desk, a small gesture, but telling. He wasn't just hearing arguments anymore. He was watching a masterclass. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to impress. She was here to win with facts, with the law, and with a mind sharp enough to outmaneuver even the most experienced courtroom players. In that moment, even the most seasoned legal experts in the room realized this wasn't just a legal fight. This was domination.